Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Lost Ark running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now last time we took a look at this game on this system, it was with just 8 gigabytes of RAM. This time we have 16, and you can very clearly see that 16 gigabytes of RAM was very necessary because we're almost using 12 gigabytes here. So the demand for more RAM was very obvious while trying to play the game. And even right now, the experience isn't 100% great. This is the game running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics settings. Now we are at the stock 15 watt TDP, but you can see that while our averages look pretty solid, averages of 41 would be perfectly fine in this kind of game, it's those 1% lows of 22 that really drag down the experience, because it really doesn't feel like a 42 FPS average when your 1% lows are pretty much half the FPS of your average. So with that being the case, we are pretty much left with the only options being to either drop the resolution or turn up the TDP. So if we adjust the TDP to the 25 watt target set by the balance preset in the AMD APU tuning utility, which I link down below in the description. In all of my videos with the AMD laptop, I have now been leaving a link to the AMD APU tuning utility. It is really simple to use, and if you want to know how to turn up the TDP on your system, I do have a video showing how it's done. But with that said, let's look at the game running at the 25 watt TDP. So you'll see that the 25 watt TDP actually ends up improving the 1% lows, though not significantly. We are now getting 1% lows of essentially 30 FPS, which is pretty solid overall. It could definitely be better, but it is now at a much more comfortable range than where we were at before, where really having 1% lows in the mid to low 20s is such a painful experience, even compared to just going up to 30. So we're still not 100% there, and it is still a problem overall, but it is a far more playable experience, though the temperatures that we're starting to reach already are starting to teeter on the edge of where I would really want to be at. So we can of course try to boost the performance a little bit more by just turning up the TDP all the way with the performance preset, which sets a target of 30 watts. But in that situation, we are definitely going to be getting into some dangerous temperature territories, and I want to preface this by letting you guys know that I do not recommend that you go with this setting almost 99% of the time. In almost any system that has this chip, you're probably not going to have the proper cooling because they're going with a budget chip, not exactly trying to build a system that is going to be able to handle high loads, because it's a system that's essentially designed to just be an office computer. It just so happens to have a chip in it that's actually really capable. They just usually end up gimping it with having cheap cooling. So with that said, let's take a look at the 30 watt TDP. So you'll see that the 30 watt TDP really did not do much at all here. We're seeing a very modest improvement in the 1% lows that is practically indistinguishable from the 25 watt TDP. And what this means is that we're essentially just running into a limitation here that we're not going to be able to get past with any form of TDP, because look at the temperatures that we're at now for literally no gain whatsoever. This is pretty much just completely an unnecessary setting to go with, because all you're doing is hurting your system at this point. For prolonged usage, these high temperatures can actually end up damaging components. Not necessarily the CPU itself, because the CPU itself is actually rated for temperatures that are significantly higher than this. They're pretty much rated to all the way up to like 105 watts, but you're not necessarily worried about the CPU as much as the components around it, and especially the ones that might not necessarily have a temperature sensor built into them. So you end up running into a possible situation where you could be damaging the hardware on your system, and the computer might not even know about it because it has no way of feeling that damage. So it's just one of those things where every time I show you guys the 30 watt TDP, just know I'm really just showing you just so that you can see what it's like. I don't actually recommend that you use it most of the time unless you have a system that is actually capable of cooling it properly. But since even the 30 watt TDP was not enough to improve the performance at 1080p, I ended up dropping the resolution down to 900p. And what that ended up actually doing is it gave us a really good gaming experience overall. Our 1% lows now being in the low 40s was a much better experience, especially since our averages were in the 60s. So really, this was a far more playable experience. And while it is right now currently set to the 30 watt TDP, I don't recommend that you play it like this. go with 25 and you're gonna have essentially the same identical experience. And if you can't go to 25 and you're just stuck at stock, you're still going to be able to play it at 900p perfectly fine. You might take a bit of a hit in the 1% lows, but it is going to be a much better experience than playing at 1080p. And if you really want to go for as much FPS as possible, especially if you're at stock, just drop down to 720p. Personally, I think it's just too much of a drop in resolution for an isometric game like this, but really it just depends on you and how much you would tolerate that. Overall, I'd say I'm a little disappointed in how this performs, just because this is a low-end system, and I always feel better when free-to-play games run on these low-end systems, because really a lot of free-to-play games are mostly just played by people that have cheaper systems, because, you know, not everybody can really be spending $60 for one game that you might get maybe 30 hours of gameplay out of. And especially in poorer countries, free-to-play games are just super popular, and so I really like it when those games are actually designed to run on the systems that people that would realistically be playing those games can actually, you know, use. And it's not to say that this game runs super poorly or anything like that, but I do really wish that it ran better than it does right now. It is not as good of an experience as I was hoping. 900p does alleviate a lot of those problems, but I always feel like for isometric games that I would rather they have a higher resolution, since already it can be a little harder to like see things just because everything's so small on the screen. But maybe it's just because I'm getting old. But anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.